December 19, 2024, News Report 1. On December 18, the U.S. Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations released a report stating that the U.S. Department of Commerce's efforts to restrict China's access to high-performance chips have been ineffective. The report reveals that China has established a vast public smuggling network, continuously utilizing U.S. products and technologies. In October 2022, the U.S. Department of Commerce implemented export control regulations targeting high-performance chips and their technology, imposing comprehensive restrictions. However, in August last year, Huawei launched its Mate 60 smartphone, which used U.S.-controlled chip technology, coinciding with U.S. Secretary of Commerce Gina Raimondo's visit to China. In September, the U.S. Congress began an investigation to determine why the chip export controls had failed to be effective. The investigation found that the U.S. Department of Commerce's enforcement efforts did not meet the standards it had set, and budget shortfalls contributed to significant enforcement gaps. Furthermore, the department allowed chip companies to independently decide how to comply with the law. The report also highlighted that smugglers, middlemen, and those falsifying shipping labels formed an underground network that illegally transported high-performance chips to China, resulting in the widespread circulation of controlled chips in the Chinese market, directly undermining the Department of Commerce's control measures. The report also noted that the Department of Commerce lacked experts on China and Chinese-speaking staff, providing an opportunity for Chinese smuggling activities. In response to these issues, the subcommittee recommended that Congress increase the Department of Commerce's budget to support the hiring of more specialists and impose higher fines on companies that violate export restrictions to improve enforcement effectiveness. News Report 2. According to the latest data released by the U.S. Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, national health expenditures in the U.S. totaled $4.86 trillion last year, representing a 7.5% increase from the previous year. This figure equates to an annual cost of $14,500 per American. The data shows that 92.5% of Americans have health insurance, with the average individual paying $4,000 for medical insurance. Last year, total spending on medical goods and services accounted for 17.6% of U.S. GDP. The increase in medical expenses is primarily attributed to the rise in insurance coverage. As insurance coverage increased, the number of surgeries and spending on pharmaceuticals also grew. Experts point out that the core value of health insurance lies in providing individuals with security, paying premiums during healthy periods and receiving better medications and treatments when ill. This mechanism offers more people access to high-quality healthcare services, highlighting the significance and value of health insurance. News Report 3. On December 18, the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, confirmed the first severe human case of bird flu. The patient, from Louisiana, was diagnosed with the H5N1 avian influenza virus on December 13. Investigations suggest that the patient had contact with backyard poultry, likely related to activities such as chicken or duck farming. Since April this year, the U.S. has reported 61 human cases of bird flu. The CDC notes that the avian influenza virus primarily spreads among animals, especially among birds, but close contact with infected poultry can lead to human infection. Health experts urge the public to strengthen the management and protection of poultry, avoid direct contact with birds at high risk of infection, and follow relevant preventive measures to reduce the risk of infection. News Report 4. According to Reuters, on December 19, police from Denmark, Sweden, Finland, and Germany boarded the Chinese bulk carrier, Yipeng No. 3, to investigate an incident involving damaged underwater cables. The report states that on November 17, the Yipeng No. 3 anchored in Sweden's Baltic Sea waters but continued to sail for more than 100 kilometers. Its anchor severed 2 underwater cables. Subsequently, on November 19, the ship was intercepted by a Danish warship. An investigation into the incident is currently underway. Denmark's Ministry of Foreign Affairs stated that, earlier this week, Chinese officials and European representatives discussed how to resolve the issue of the Yipeng No. 3. Denmark hopes to allow the ship to depart once the investigation is completed, while Sweden favors towing the vessel back to port for further investigation. The final resolution of the incident awaits further negotiations and the release of investigation results. News Report 5. According to Reuters, U.S. President-elect Donald Trump had previously stated plans to establish a strategic Bitcoin reserve. However, Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell on December 18 stated that the Federal Reserve has no intention of participating in the government's Bitcoin reserve plan. He pointed out that under current laws, the Federal Reserve cannot hold Bitcoin, and whether or not to allow it is a legal matter that should be decided by Congress. The Federal Reserve will not seek to amend relevant laws. Trump has been a supporter of cryptocurrencies, and his stance, referred to as the Trump effect, has contributed to Bitcoin's price surge, which has more than doubled this year, surpassing the $100,000 mark. On July 31, Republican Senator Cynthia Lummis introduced a Bitcoin Strategic Reserve Act, proposing that the U.S. Treasury purchase Bitcoin using funds from the Federal Reserve's bank deposits and gold holdings. The future of this bill remains uncertain, but it reflects the growing importance of cryptocurrencies in U.S. policy discussions. News Report 6. According to Radio France International, a recent report by Bank of America points out that Hong Kong has had a fiscal deficit exceeding 100 billion Hong Kong dollars for 3 consecutive years. This indicates that Hong Kong is facing a structural fiscal shortfall, and fiscal deficits may become a regular occurrence. The report warns that Hong Kong's fiscal reserves can only support the region for another 2 to 3 years. Hong Kong's government heavily relies on land sale revenues. However, by October of this year, land sale revenue amounted to only 3.7 billion Hong Kong dollars, far below expectations. Additionally, the government's infrastructure retail bonds saw insufficient subscriptions, reflecting concerns about Hong Kong's fiscal situation. Bank of America predicts that Hong Kong's fiscal reserves will fall to 630 billion Hong Kong dollars this year, a 45% reduction from 2019. If fiscal deficits continue and worsen, Hong Kong will face 2 choices. A significant reduction in government spending, which would directly impact social welfare and the well-being of the population. Borrowing funds, which could threaten the stability of the Hong Kong dollar and make the currency peg system unsustainable, potentially leading to a devaluation or collapse of the currency. Bank of America's analysis has sparked widespread concern over the sustainability of Hong Kong's economic and fiscal policies, with the market awaiting but questioning the government's response. News Report 7. According to Caixin, on December 19, the Guizhou Provincial High People's Court issued a final judgment in the case of human trafficker Yu Huaying, sentencing him to death, subject to review by the Supreme People's Court. The court found that between 1993 and 2003, Yu Huaying trafficked 17 children from various regions, including Guizhou, Chongqing, and Yunnan. These children came from 12 families, 5 of which lost 2 children. The case caused immense harm to the victims' families. In June 2022, Yu Huaying was arrested in Chongqing. The ruling reflects the judicial authorities' zero-tolerance stance on child trafficking crimes, emphasizing the severity of such offenses in upholding social justice and family rights. News Report 8. According to Caixin, on December 19, the Beihai Intermediate People's Court in Guangxi Province sentenced Wu Wei, former secretary of the Liuzhou Municipal Party Committee, to death with a 2-year reprieve for accepting bribes and abusing his power. The court found that during his tenure as mayor and party secretary of Liuzhou, Wu Wei illegally incurred debt to fund the construction of a light rail project without approval from the state council, resulting in an additional 17.6 billion yuan in government debt for Liuzhou. However, the light rail project was ultimately abandoned, leaving behind cement columns and empty stations, which became known as the scenery to the citizens of Liuzhou. Meanwhile, Wu Wei used his official position to accept bribes amounting to 186 million yuan. Wu Wei, aged 56, became mayor of Liuzhou in January 2016, was promoted to party secretary in 2021, and was dismissed from his post in November of the same year. The court ruling noted that Wu Wei's abuse of power and corruption severely damaged national interests, and he was one of the key figures responsible for the light rail project's failure. The case also involved Wu Wei's predecessor, Zheng Zhengkang, who was sentenced to 16.5 years in prison for bribery and abuse of power. The two officials' cases have drawn significant public attention to local government infrastructure project management and anti-corruption efforts. News Report 9. According to Xinhua News Agency, Chinese President Xi Jinping arrived in Macau on the afternoon of December 18 and conducted an inspection on December 19. The security measures during his visit were exceptionally tight, drawing widespread attention from the residents of Macau. On the morning of December 19, Xi Jinping, accompanied by Macau's chief executive Ho Iat Seng, visited the Hengqin Guangdong-Macau Deep Cooperation Zone. Located in Zhuhai, Hengqin was originally underdeveloped but was eventually designated for Macau's use to promote economic diversification. The Cooperation Zone, managed by Macau, provides valuable space for development, particularly given the limited land resources and high reclamation costs in Macau. In the afternoon, Xi Jinping met with former Macau chief executives Edmund Ho Haohua and Cui Sion, as well as current Hong Kong chief executive John Lee. In the evening, he attended a related banquet. According to the schedule, Xi Jinping is set to attend the inauguration of the new government of Macau on December 20. This visit underscores the central government's high regard for Macau's future development, particularly in terms of regional cooperation, economic diversification, and social stability. News Report 10. On December 18, the Federal Reserve announced a 25 basis point interest rate cut, but the US dollar index rose to 108, causing the Chinese yuan to weaken further. The onshore yuan briefly fell below 7.3 during trading, eventually closing at 7.2992, down by 136 basis points, hitting its lowest level in 13.5 months. The offshore yuan was even weaker, briefly dipping below 7.32, and closed at 7.31 at midnight. The People's Bank of China set the yuan's middle rate at 7.1911, down by 31 basis points from the previous day. Traders have pointed out that the Fed's monetary policy caused the US dollar to strengthen, putting pressure on the yuan. To stabilize the exchange rate, the State Administration of Foreign Exchange sold US dollars through state-owned banks in the market, rather than directly intervening, to protect the foreign exchange reserves. However, this strategy increases risks for commercial banks, potentially leading to significant losses. News Report 11. According to the Liberty Times, a police officer from Taiwan's National Police Agency was arrested for leaking President Lai Ching-te's schedule, suspected of violating the National Security Confidentiality Act. The officer shared details of Lai's schedule, including destinations, convoy routes, police deployment, and meeting personnel, with a friend, though the officer's motives remain unclear. This is the second leak incident involving Taiwan's presidential security team this year. Previously, four soldiers from Taiwan's military police 211th Battalion sold presidential secrets to Chinese intelligence agents, and were prosecuted. These incidents have exposed vulnerabilities in Taiwan's presidential security system, potentially threatening national security. News Report 12. The United Daily News reports that an international aviation data analysis company recently published a list of the world's busiest air routes, with the route from Taiwan Taoyuan International Airport to Hong Kong International Airport being ranked as the busiest. This route ranks first, demonstrating the frequent exchanges between Taiwan and Hong Kong. In the ranking, the second busiest route is from Cairo, Egypt, to Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, while the third is from Seoul, South Korea, to Tokyo, Japan. The high frequency of these routes reflects the close connections and transportation demand between these regions. Additionally, many passengers from Hong Kong prefer to transit through Taipei to reach their destinations, rather than flying directly. This trend indicates that travelers opt for cheaper flights with a layover in Taipei. This also reflects an economic downturn, with people tending to choose lower-cost travel options. Although the Taiwan-Hong Kong route has once again become the world's busiest, passenger numbers have still decreased by 15% compared to pre-pandemic levels in 2019. This year, the number of round-trip passengers on this route reached 6.78 million, a 48% increase compared to the previous year. This indicates that as the pandemic gradually recovers, air traffic between Taiwan and Hong Kong is gradually increasing, though it has not yet fully returned to pre-pandemic levels. News Report 13. The Liberty Times reports that a fire broke out at a newly constructed supermarket warehouse in Dada District, Taichung, on December 19, resulting in 9 deaths and 8 injuries. The fire was very intense, with thick smoke rising into the sky. The warehouse, owned by the PetSmart company, saw most of the victims trapped in the third-floor mezzanine area, unable to escape. The head of the Taichung City Fire Department stated that the fire originated from flammable materials in the basement and spread to the upper floors, trapping the victims. The fire has sparked widespread concern, with questions raised about the cause of the fire and the response to the emergency. There are also increasing calls for stricter regulations on public safety management and building fire prevention systems. News Report 14. Reuters reported that NATO Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg announced on December 18 that NATO has taken over the coordination of Western assistance to Ukraine from the United States. Germany's command center has already begun operations. Since the outbreak of the war in Ukraine, the U.S. had been leading in designing the assistance efforts for Ukraine. However, European countries expressed concern that if President Trump is re-elected, the U.S. might reduce its support for Ukraine. As a result, European nations decided to take over the coordination early to ensure continued support for Ukraine. European countries have committed to providing $30 billion in aid to Ukraine next year, though such commitments are often not fully honored, and actual funding may be significantly lower than expected. Additionally, AFP reported that EU leaders held a summit on December 19, conveying a clear message: any decisions involving Ukraine must include Ukraine's participation. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz emphasized that Europe's top priority is to ensure that Ukraine is not forced to accept an unequal peace agreement. News Report 15. The Australian Broadcasting Corporation reported that New Zealand experienced a technical economic recession in 2023. The country's GDP contracted for 2 consecutive quarters, with a 1.1% decline in the second quarter and a 1% decline in the third quarter. This marked the worst 6-month period since 1991, with weak economic performance. Experts pointed out that New Zealand's long-term austerity policies have weakened economic vitality, with weak household consumption being the primary cause. However, the fundamental reason is New Zealand's heavy reliance on the Chinese market. China is not only New Zealand's largest export market but also a major source of tourists. When the Chinese economy slows down, it directly impacts New Zealand's exports and tourism industry. The report also noted similar situations in Germany, particularly during the pandemic when China exerted economic pressure on these countries. In contrast, Australia, with its more strained relationship with China, quickly sought other markets after facing trade sanctions from China, and exports such as coal grew, leading to better economic performance. Japan was also similarly affected, especially as China's financial support helped Japan overcome a 30-year economic slump. The real estate market revived, and Tokyo's housing prices have surpassed their historical highs. Japan's recovery, fueled by Chinese financial inflows, highlights China's significant role in the global economy. These examples show that a country's reliance on the Chinese market directly impacts its economic performance, particularly during a slowdown in China's economy. News Report 16. The Australian Broadcasting Corporation reported that the Australian government plans to limit the number of international students through an executive order. Although the government introduced a relevant bill in August this year, the bill was not passed by Parliament. Therefore, Australia has announced that starting in 2025, a cap on international student numbers will be implemented. Under this policy, the cap for international students in the coming year will be 270,000, with specific quotas for each university. If the number of international student applications exceeds the quota at a given university, the processing of student visa applications will be affected. Specifically, applications that exceed the government-set cap will be considered lower priority, and processing speeds will slow down. This policy is expected to impact Australia's international student market and have a certain effect on universities' student recruitment strategies. News Report 17. The World Journal recently reported on the early admissions results from prestigious universities such as Harvard University. According to the report, Harvard admitted 15 Chinese students from overseas high schools but did not admit any students from domestic high schools in China. Additionally, Boston University admitted 13 Chinese students, including 2 from Beijing and 2 from Shenyang. Cornell University admitted the most Chinese students, with a total of 19, including 2 from Hong Kong, 2 from Beijing, and 1 from Shenyang. The World Journal also reported that Harvard Law School no longer considers diversity fairness factors in its admissions process. As a result of this policy shift, the number of Asian American freshmen at Harvard Law School reached 132, an increase of 30% from the previous year. However, the number of African American and Hispanic freshmen dropped by 8%, while the proportion of other groups, mainly white, increased. News Report 18. The Yomiuri Shimbun reported that the Japan Meteorological Agency announced that Tokyo, Osaka, Kyoto, Nara, and Kyushu received the first snowfall of the winter season on December 19. Tokyo's snowfall arrived 15 days earlier than last year, while Osaka and Nara saw snow 2 days earlier than last year, and Kyoto and Kyushu also experienced an earlier than usual snow season. This marks the official arrival of winter weather in Japan.